Hey everybody, welcome back to Fear versus Freedom. My name is David Cromar. My colleague Chase Flores is unable to join me tonight. We do have different schedules, and so it's not always going to work out that we can be together to present the information that we've worked hard at putting together for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and do this tonight without Chase, and maybe he'll be able to watch this video and then do a video of his own with some of his own information that he wants to share along with it. Okay, that being said, what's the topic for tonight? We discussed a little bit of vaccine information last time. It's going to be a common topic for us because it's very important. So we're going to take a look at social engineering and see how we're being basically engineered to give consent to do different things, right? Whether it's a medical procedure or to buy a certain product, we're being engineered in a way with our thoughts and how we're being manipulated basically by the media, by TV shows, by headlines to act a certain way, to purchase certain things. It's interesting how much of our lives is influenced by propaganda, by public relations, by social engineering. So for example, bacon and eggs. When I mention bacon and eggs, the majority of people automatically are thinking breakfast. Well, why? Eggs and bacon are both perfectly good foods for lunch and dinner, really any time of day. Why do we automatically associate bacon and eggs with breakfast? Well, it's an interesting question. And let me introduce you to a public relations specialist who actually wrote the book on propaganda, literally. Meet Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays happens to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So most people have heard of Sigmund Freud, but not a lot of people have heard of Edward Bernays. And yet, believe it or not, Edward Bernays, his influence has probably been more impactful on society than his uncle. Why? So he basically kind of really fine-tuned the art of propaganda. And one of his early projects in public relations was a packing company whose bacon sales were really low and they needed to improve it. So they hired Edward Bernays and said, hey, we need to improve our sales in bacon. This is the Beech Nut Packing Company. And they came to Edward Bernays and said, can you help us? And he'd been studying public relations and kind of fine-tuning propaganda. He says, you bet I can help you. And he goes to a physician friend of his and kind of has this light conversation around breakfast. And he kind of plants the seed in the physician's mind about the way he frames the question. He says, we end up spending a lot of energy through the night as we rest and repair. And then we wake up. Don't you think we need to replenish all that energy so that we can have it throughout the day and be able to utilize that energy throughout the day? He says, what do you think would be better, a light breakfast or a heavy breakfast? And obviously the way the question was positioned, the physician kind of thinks about it and he goes, well, a heavy breakfast, of course. He says, yeah, I thought so too. And he says, could you do me a favor at no cost? Could you send out a survey to all the physicians within the association and let's see if we can get their input on this? And of course he says, you bet. And so they send out this survey to over 5,000 physicians across the nation and kind of position it the exact same way. And the majority of them, over 4,500, come back, answer this survey and come back saying, a heavy breakfast, of course, is going to be better than a light breakfast. And so with that, they take that survey. Just think of how many surveys are out there today. This is powerful data. So they take that survey, and guess what? Every headline is parroting over the next few weeks to months. You got it. Over 4,500 physicians agree a heavy breakfast is best, better than a light breakfast. And of those physicians, the majority of them recommend bacon and eggs for breakfast. And literally from then on, this is like in the 1930s, I believe, but I'm going to refer you to a source to learn this story a little bit in more detail. But from that point forward, bacon and eggs was associated with a healthy breakfast. And what happened with the sales of bacon? not just for the beech nut packing company, but bacon across the nation, sales just skyrocketed. Bacon and eggs became a staple as a breakfast food. And from that point forward, Edward Bernays began to really fine-tune the art of propaganda. So what else did he have a hand in? Big tobacco. Big tobacco saw this huge market in the nation that they were missing, right? Men back in the day it was okay for men to smoke, but it was looked down upon or taboo for women to do so. And so tobacco says, hey, look, we are missing out on 50% of the market out there because there's this perception that smoking is not something that women should be doing. It's just something that's okay for men. So with his understanding of how to associate a product with some type of emotion, instead of selling with facts, you sell with association of a specific emotion. He came up with this campaign, and he created this big community event, almost like a parade. I think it was even a political event, and had these attractive group of women, young women, that were going to be marching through this parade. And when he called out, light up the torches of freedom, the women would pull out a pack of cigarettes that were strapped to their inner thigh, pull out a cigarette and light it up. Okay? So what this was a demonstration of equality, right? A women's rights movement, a demonstration that women are equal to men, and also that smoking cigarettes was this symbol of empowerment and of strength for women. And from that point forward, women were heavily marketed to by the tobacco companies for cigarettes. And it would be, oh, use this thin one and you can be thin. Or, the most influential stars were always placed with cigarettes of a specific brand. And it became this whole status symbol. And that status symbol just skyrocketed tobacco sales. So the guy is literally a genius, and they have figured out how to fine-tune this propaganda or public relations to be able to manipulate the masses. Okay. So this is an excerpt from the very beginning of chapter 1. Okay, I'm just going to read it out loud. You can read along if you can see this well. It says, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanisms of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Okay, there's a lot going on right there. I encourage you to read this information on your own. But man, the small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. You can bet that for centuries this has been studied heavily by those in power, and that these manipulating forces are used all day, every day in our lives. I'm not immune to it. You're not immune to it. But what we need to do is start to recognize it so that we can see deception being sent our way and know how to counteract or how to kind of view things more objectively. So who else had a big hand in propaganda? Bertrand Russell. He wrote a book called The Impact of Science on Society. Geez, science, that's not a hot word lately, is it? Everything's about science. Science says this and science says that. Science is the biggest religion in the world right now. And it absolutely is a religion full of dogma. So what does this say? Hopefully it'll show, but I'm going to read this out loud. In this book it says, I think the subject will be of most importance politically is mass psychology. its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. Religion plays a part, though a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. Radio still does, like say TV and internet is replaced that. It goes on. It may be hoped that in time anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything. If he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment. This subject will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Interesting. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of home is obstructive. I'm going to read that again. First, that the influence of home is obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. But I anticipate it is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost just to make them believe it's dark gray. So they're over the last few decades, centuries, and decades in the early part of the century, you can bet a ton of resources went into these programs, figuring out what were the most effective methods and nailing that down. And they did it. And then they implemented it across system-wide. Think Common Core, right, in the education system. Everybody's being brainwashed commonly in the same way to enhance that groupthink mentality. So where does all the indoctrination begin? As I said, in the education system, especially in the young education system, like before 10. And that parents that are actually self-educators and want to learn a lot and teach their kids, man, they're an obstruction of this goal, right? So we have influence at home, influence at school, influence at church, and definitely influence in the doctor's office, okay? And we have to be able to think and discern for ourselves, what do I believe and why? Is it true? Is it tradition? Is it something that I should be believing? Question everything. Start to question everything you've ever learned. All right, so Edward Bernays figured out that it is possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to people's emotional desires and feelings, whether that's specific to health, politics, commerce, anything. So, for example, and this is a good one, the idea that injecting toxic chemicals directly into your body will make you healthier. That's completely irrational. But because of social engineered public perception, it makes you feel safe and protected. We'll talk more about it. So, vaccine-induced herd immunity. That's another social engineered idea. It's a complete myth. If you pay attention to the science and follow the science actually shows that herd immunity is impossible, at least vaccine-induced. In fact, the studies of herd immunity go back to wild acquired measles. And they understood that if the population had at least 68% of people that had measles, there wouldn't be an outbreak. As new babies were born and the population grew and that coverage rate declined below that percentage, you would see an epidemic or an outbreak until coverage gained that area again. So that's where herd immunity began. And then of course, vaccine science tried to take over that and say, oh, we could create herd immunity just by one vaccine within 50% of the population. We're going to eradicate measles in a year. Well, that never happened. So then it went up to 65%, then 75%. Now we're up to 95%. Soon we'll be at 100%, and we'll still have outbreaks because you can't create herd immunity with vaccine immunity. It's not strong enough. Anyway, I digress. Herd mentality, on the other hand, well, that's alive and well. Another expert. So the systematic study of mass psychology revealed the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate man in the group. These studies established that the group has mental characteristics distinct from those of the individual. Again, the group has mental characteristics that are distinct from those of the individual and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the question naturally arose, if we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing it? Absolutely. And it happens every day, every single day. So with vaccines in mind, let me introduce you to the Children Vaccine Initiative, okay? The Strategic Plan. This is a book written by the World Health Organization along with the Child Vaccine Initiative to create kind of the game plan on how to change public perception about vaccination to keep it positive and that it's a wonderful thing and that infectious disease is so scary and bad. Just keep in mind, as long as there's ever been a vaccine program, there's always been an anti-vaccine movement because there's always been vaccine injury. Always. People today think, oh, anti-vaxxers are this new threat. No. As long as there's been vaccines, there's been anti-vaxxers, or I should say ex-vaxxers, because they are people who witnessed injury in their family. All right, anyway. The Children's Vaccine Initiative and World Health Organization. What is it? It's a long-term game plan to improve public perception of vaccines. What are some of the key points? Well, they use mainstream media to structure messages and shape our public opinion. They co-opt or persuade key opinion people in all levels of society, medical, lay people, entertainment, to get pro-vaccine spokespeople at every level spouting one common message. Vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are safe and effective. You've probably heard it 10,000 times over the last few months as the media jumps and hypes up this outbreak issue. The same thing happened in 2014 with, was it 2014 or 15, with the California Disneyland measles outbreak. Anytime there's an outbreak, the media is going to be all over it because that drives what? Sales. So, who controls the narrative and the perception? Well, it's the vaccine stakeholders. Who are they? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of them, right? You've got a computer software billionaire who invests $10 billion to create the decade of vaccines, which we're currently in. The pharmaceutical industry, they control 75 to 80% of the mainstream media. So they control the narrative, whether it's in commercials, whether it's in TV shows, whether it's in the news. Everything's going to be pro-vaccine. It always is. Academia. Okay, you've got Rockefeller education system supporting Rockefeller medicine. So even the doctors who are spending 10, 20 years of education is getting a biased education specific to the medicine and pharmaceutical business. Okay, the decisions that they're taught to make support the business of medicine. Okay, I'm not saying there's no value in medicine, because there can be, but it is overused, overprescribed, it's abused, and really the risk is downplayed while the benefits are exaggerated. We'll continue to learn about it. Now, you also have the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the World Health Organization. All of these organizations are working in unison toward the same goal. And if that's happening, we should all be asking a lot of questions. We always should be. What are the goals? Well, let's look at what's happening in society right now, because they're getting a lot of success with these goals. Restrict our health freedoms. Check. Censor what we read and can say. Man, that's happening in unreal amounts. We're talking Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, Google, Amazon, all of them supporting censorship and not allowing any content that's contrary to the mainstream narrative of vaccines are safe and effective or pharmaceuticals are wonderful, right? They want to shut down anybody who has a contrary belief, not even belief, or contrary data that comes from science that is right out in front of you. They just don't want you to know it's there. We'll show you. Well, what else? Remove our ability to choose what goes into our bodies. Yep, they've taken away that right in Mississippi. They've taken it away in California. They're taking it away in Washington. They took it away in Vermont. There's legislation in many different states as we speak right now to remove personal and religious belief mandates or exemptions so that they can make vaccines mandatory for everybody, regardless of the cost and the lives lost from it. How do they do it? I mean, how are we deceived like this? Well, they are masters of sleight of hand or misdirection, okay? You want to think of like David Copperfield, right? These talented magicians that can get you to look over here while something's happening over here, right? Don't look at this issue, look at this issue. Or don't look at this problem, look at our utopian idea on how to fix it, whether it can actually happen or not, right? Misdirection. So you need to get good at how to see through this BS and look for the details, look for the data, and study it yourself. Okay, you're smart. You are smart. You have the ability to study these things and learn about them, even if it takes you 3-4 years. Dive into it. Learn, read, reread it again until you start to comprehend it. You'll figure it out and you'll start to see the truth that we're being lied to in simplistic ways to keep us in line. So they use illusion, persuasion, misdirection, and deception. What's an illusion? Here's a good one. Vaccines are solely responsible for the reduction in mortality from infectious disease. What a joke. It's a great topic, illusion. And I highly recommend the book Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphries. She blows us out of the water. You actually get to go down and take a true view of the historical data of infectious disease. And what you're going to find is that the mortality rates of all disease dropped 99.9 some odd percent for every disease before the vaccines were ever introduced. Okay? And you'll learn that sanitation, nutrition, roadways, other social programs had huge impacts on infectious disease. And that true herd immunity had kind of set up in place, and we were having, actually we were in a great place before vaccines came. Persuasion, how do they persuade? Well, they use fear, or they use the idea of security, safety, right? So an example, you go to the doctor and you say, I'm not sure I want to do the vaccines. Well, let me just tell you, if your kid gets measles, he's going to die, right? So they say your baby could die. Or, well, you got to do it for the greater good, right? They're going to put guilt on you. Things like that. Misdirection, right? For example, there is a ton of science out there that, especially around the toxicity of aluminum and how much danger there is with injected aluminum from the vaccines. Well, they don't want to let you start looking at that type of data. So the misdirection is always about Andy Wakefield is a fraud. Oh, there's only one study out there. Don't worry, it's been debunked. Andy Wakefield's been debunked. First of all, you don't even know who Andy Wakefield is. Go look it up. He's a gastrointestinal specialist that was doing a study on chronic inflammation and infection in the gut of these children that he studied that had autistic behaviors. And what he found was, yeah, there was a chronic infection of vaccine strain measles in their gut. Not once did he say that's a causal issue or that there was a causal link between MMR and autism. Nope, study didn't say that. In fact, all it said was there was some type of chronic infection in the gut that was linked to these behaviors. From that point forward, his information in that study has been replicated over and over and over again in multiple studies, driving home that gut-brain connection that's there, and it's real. And that had nothing to do with the retraction of that study. So I'll probably dedicate an entire video just to Andy Wakefield so people can understand the truth of what that is. But they leverage that as misdirection. You'll always hear that study reference. Oh, it's been debunked, it's been debunked. BS. You haven't debunked anything. Vaccines are not safe, and there's so much data out there that says they are not safe, that they do cause harm. Autoimmune, neurological, allergies, rashes, all kinds of problems. Anyway, deception. Deception is they will only tell you that vaccines are safe. They'll say things like they only contain a virus and an inert fluid like saline or salt water. And they leave out all the dangerous chemicals like aluminum, like formaldehyde, like polysorbate 80, like all these other things that are in there. Fragmented DNA, human DNA, things that are horribly dangerous. Completely talked down and even omitted. So, do we live in the land of liberty? As long as you comply with mandates, don't ask questions, stay in line and follow our guidelines, you're free. Sounds like freedom's a bit of an illusion itself. Okay, so let's see how they kind of are controlling the narrative. So this comes from the Federal Register, from the Department of Health and Human Services and the FDA back in 1984. It says, any possible doubts, whether or not well-founded, okay? Any possible doubt, whether or not well-founded, about the safety of the vaccine cannot be allowed to exist in view of the need to assure that vaccines will continue to be used to the maximum extent. So no matter how valid the safety concern is, we cannot allow it to exist at all, right? So even if they know there's a huge problem with the vaccine, it's going to be covered up, it's going to be hidden because they can't let anybody question the vaccine program. It's a $50 billion industry. How do they do it? Well, they employ everything that drives our thought process, that influences our thinking processes, right? So they've got Google wrapped up in this. They've got Microsoft. They've got Facebook. Like I said, Pinterest, Instagram, all of these doing censoring. That's anything that can question vaccine safety. You can't read this. But it says Google to reshape how it provides health information, and the Mayo Clinic joins as a partner. So it says it's certainly a timely moment for the unveiling, considering the battle to separate fact from fiction on the topic of vaccines, which means they're only going to tell you what they want you to know. Okay? Just take a look at the headlines these days. It's insane. They're all they talk about is measles is deadly. These infectious diseases should be a thing of the past, regardless of the cost, right? Just because we can prevent measles with a vaccine means we should do it. And some people might ask, well, isn't there a benefit to getting measles? And they'll say, absolutely not. There's no benefit. Well, that's not true. We know that if you've had the measles, you're now much less likely to get Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas and even leukemias. We know that if you get the mumps, you're less likely to get ovarian cancer. We know that if you get any type of acute fever, infectious illness, it's actually going to improve your immune system to help you fight cancer better in the future. So the headlines are very deceiving. I was going to see if I have any up. I don't. I'll give you a good example. I saw a story, and yes, it's a sad story, where this 6-month-old baby in California got the measles. What does the headline say? Our community failed us. As if it's everyone else's fault that their baby got measles. Okay, let's look at the data. Number one, we know that even with 100% coverage, you're going to see outbreaks and epidemics. Okay, It's there. Go research it. Number two, babies used to be protected by maternal immunity, okay? So really, the community didn't fail you. The vaccine program failed you. Because had you not been vaccinated, Mom, you would have had measles at an appropriate age in elementary school, and you would have had such a strong antibody response to natural measles. It's actually 23 times or more stronger than the vaccine reaction, right? And so this is lifelong immunity that can be passed down through transplacental maternal immunity to the baby. And also through breastfeeding, okay? Once the measles vaccine was introduced back in the early 60s, and that first generation was old enough to have kids, at that point, measles in infants tripled, okay? Why? Because that transplacental maternal immunity is no longer strong enough to be passed down to the baby, and breastfeeding is happening less and less because formula is there and being sold that it's just as good, if not better than breastfeeding, and it's not. So you got to understand the details. You got to do your research and know how you're being manipulated here. Our community failed us. Let's ride that guilt. You got to do it for the greater good and all this crap. You know what? Also, I'm sorry that that baby went through that rash and the very unpleasant sickness that came with it. But you know what? Nobody's died in the 800 cases of measles. Although I've seen so many vaccine-induced deaths, and even the ones that don't get out are injured. Okay, my son literally has life-threatening events every single day and has for the past 10 years of his life. Every day he has a massive seizure, or 10 or 20. Okay, I'm sorry your kid got sick for a week, but mine is damaged for life. In fact, all 4 of my kids have vaccine injury because I was slow to learn this information, which is why I want to share it. All right, so how does the medical system continue to persuade and keep us in line? Well, they use it by not giving data, right? Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS strategy. So we want to make sure we persuade rather than inform. So they use fear and guilt. Oh, if you don't do this, your baby could die. Oh, your baby's going to be crippled by disease. You have a moral liability to protect the herd. Wakefield is a fraud. There's no autism connection. Vaccines do more than you could ever understand. Got that? Vaccines do more than your little mind could ever comprehend because we're smarter than the world. Vaccines are safe and effective. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Or, here's a great one. When you go and tell your doctor, you know what, I'm thinking about not vaccinating my kids anymore. They're going to say, well, we stand by vaccination and you're going to have to do it or we're going to have to let you go. You're going to have to find another doctor. Well, why? Because we follow the recommendation of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Awesome, doc. Do you do any independent thinking of your own, or do you always just do as you're told? How much research have you done on the vaccines? Tell me, what's the difference between ingested aluminum and injected aluminum? How much of that is going to our internal organs? How much of that is going to the brain? Does it cause microglial activation in the brain, creating chronic, lifelong neurodegeneration? You don't know? Oh, because you just do what the American Academy of Pediatrics tells you? How about you go study it? How about you go look at the data? Okay? How about you go look at the ingredients? Go read the package insert on the shots that you've been giving all your patients for the past 30 years. And then reevaluate what you're advising your people. And honestly, you shouldn't be telling them what to do. You should be consulting and then going along with what they decide together. Okay? Stop saying, do it my way or you're out. Start supporting your patients and having communication. American doctors said fear was the #1 motivating factor in getting parents to accept vaccination. So let's just continue to do that. Here's a Forbes article. How do you change an anti-vaccine parent's mind? Scare the crap out of them. You know why they're so passionate about anti-vaccine? They've already had the crap scared out of them. They've held their babies next to death or dead in their arms after a vaccine. Okay? I've been in the ICU with my boy 5 separate times, life on the line, in comas. Why? Because he's vaccine injured. Oh, well, that's just an anecdotal story. Okay, we can't use anecdotal stories until you want to, right? You'll go dig up that one kid that got tetanus because they didn't handle the incision correctly, and that's the one that anecdotal story matters. But the hundreds of thousands of parents that are saying their kid was injured, that's anecdotal. You can't listen to that one. What about that one measles kid that ended up in the ICU with encephalitis? Oh yeah, we better put that all over the news. What about the thousands of kids, tens of thousands of kids with encephalitis, with autism, with epilepsy, with type 1 diabetes? No. No, that's anecdotal. Whatever. Ooh, okay, so what happens when outbreaks happen and the media jumps all over it like crazy? Hysteria. Oh my gosh, measles. We have 10 cases, 20 cases, 30 cases. Everyone's going to die. No one's dying. But they make you fear it to the point where you're going to run and get in line and get that shot if you were hesitant, right? So this is again after the Disneyland outbreak. Since the recent measles outbreak, what changes have you observed in the willingness of families to accept vaccinations? More acceptance of vaccines in general. Over here it says, on the heels of the California outbreak, sporadic news reports claimed that more parents, including some of those who had previously refused vaccines, were seeking and accepting vaccines for their children. And Merck's sales of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine soared. Thank you, mainstream media. All right. So from Bloomberg Business Report, again after the Disneyland measles outbreak, quote, there's nothing like an outbreak to get parents to vaccinate or to help vaccine sales. Yeah, billions, cha-ching. All right. So what's happening now, though? People are speaking out. People like Del Bigtree, people like Dr. Suzanne Humphries, people like Dr. Teresa Deisher, people like Chris Exley, people like Chris Shaw, people like me, people like you. We're all speaking out and we're saying, hey, there's a danger there. And parents are starting to pay attention. Parents are starting to realize there's an issue with the toxicity of aluminum, that there are problems with the efficacy of vaccines. For example, pertussis, 86% of all cases are fully vaccinated. Did you know that? In fact, the majority of the outbreaks of pertussis that have happened are amongst 100% vaccinated. There's a huge issue there. Same thing with mumps. Okay, there's a litigation going on right now between some researchers, vaccine researchers, and Merck, saying that Merck fraudulently portrayed data that the mumps portion of the vaccine worked when it didn't. But they want to keep it all together because they have the patent on the MMR. And they want that to be the one that's used because that's billions and billions of dollars. Anyway, the fact that flu vaccines actually make you more susceptible to other strains of flu because they get it wrong almost every year, as well as other respiratory diseases, right? If you get the flu shot, you're now 4 times more likely to get RSV or some other respiratory disease or infection. The severe reactions to the vaccine are increasing chronic illness in our youth. Absolutely. That even with more and more vaccine coverage of MMR, we're seeing more and more outbreaks. Okay, we've got 91 to 95% vaccine coverage across the nation from different states. You're still seeing outbreaks. You're going to see outbreaks even if there's 100%. This was predicted back in 1984 that by 2050 we were going to be in the worst position than we were before the vaccine. It's coming. We're already seeing signs of it. Go look at the studies. Dangerous vaccines are given during pregnancy. And a lot of women are catching on to the fact that they get the flu shot or the DTaP. A few months later, they've miscarried. Or even right away, they miscarry. They also are having immune activation during gestation and triggering autism. Horrible. Okay, you probably can't read this, This is a study that just came out in February of 2014. It's called The 112-Year Odyssey of Pertussis and Pertussis Vaccines, Mistakes Made and Implications for the Future. And I'll just read this highlighted part. It says, in the last 13 years, major pertussis epidemics have occurred in the United States. The numerous studies have shown the deficiencies in DTaP vaccines, including the small number of antigens that the vaccine contain and the type of cellular immune response that they elicit. The type of cellular response is a predominantly T2 response, which is an inflammatory response, a T2 response, which results in less efficacy and a shorter duration of protection. Because of the small number of antigens, 3 to 5 versus over 3,000 in the DTP, linked epitope suppression occurs. Because of linked epitope suppression, get this, all children who were primed by DTaP vaccines will be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetime. And there is no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. You got that, folks? You get the DTaP, you're now more likely to come down with pertussis throughout your entire life. Good luck with your vaccines. Here's another thing that drives me nuts. Pro-vaccine reps can spit out lies with absolutely no consequence. They can say whatever the hell they want, and there's no fact checking, there's no nothing that goes on. Everybody just assumes they're speaking gospel. I mean, it is religious dogma, but it ain't gospel. For example, recently, Peter Hotez, he's a virologist, was on the Joe Rogan Experience. And they had this big, long conversation about infectious disease and tropical disease and all kinds of things. And they started getting into the anti-vaccine movement. And of course, they talk about all the pros about vaccines and how they're so wonderful. But Joe kind of starts asking him, well, what do you do to maintain health? You eat a healthy diet? Oh, no, that's my weakness, cheeseburgers and whatever. And he says, what about exercise? Oh, I'm not very good at it. Do you take vitamins? Oh, no, vitamins are useless. And he goes, there's a lot of clinical data that talks about how important vitamins are, especially vitamin D, vitamin A, the omegas. And he's like, well, yeah, you're right. There's some valid cases for vitamins. And Joe says, there's a large body of data that connects poor diet to a host of diseases. And he says, you can't be pushing only chemicals in injectable forms to facilitate health. And what does Peter say? He goes, oh, they aren't chemicals. They're vaccines. And Joe goes, yeah, aren't there chemicals in them? What's in them? And Peter Hotez says, no, not chemicals. They're antigens and macromolecules. He goes, yeah, but what's the fluid that the antigen is in? He goes, oh, typically it's just saline or salt water. Literally just says that on this nationally syndicated podcast. Oh, it's not chemicals. It's just an inert saline placebo, or not placebo, an inert saline injection. Full on just lies. What other lies did he say in that interview? That there's no benefits from a natural measles infection. He says it's only dangerous, it's only bad, and there's nothing wrong that could ever happen with getting the measles vaccine. Again, I already told you, there's huge benefits to actual natural occurring measles, natural lifelong immunity that can be passed down to your kids, a stronger immune system that can fight cancer, right? And he says, no, there's no benefit to natural infection of measles. BS. What else did he say? He says vaccine injury is 1 in 10 million. 1 in 10 million. See how they downplay the negatives and then exaggerate the positives? It's ridiculous. There's no way it's 1 in 10 million. It's easily 1 in 100, if not 1 in 10. And again, the vaccine adverse injury or event reporting system is a self-reporting system and is only capturing less than 1% of what's actually happening in the world. That's been proven. Dr. Paul Offit, another vaccine, he's a talking head of the vaccine industry, but he's also an inventor of vaccines. He invented and patented the rotavirus vaccine. He made $10 million on that. Of course he's pro-vaccine. But he doesn't need a measles vaccine because he had natural measles and he has lifelong immunity that anybody would covet. What does he say? Any journalist that can write an objective story and even talk about any potential harm of vaccines should be in journalism jail. right? You can't allow that to be printed. So you're going to just go ahead and put them in journalism jail. And that happens, just ask Cheryl Atkinson. What else does Paul Offit say? He actually said that an infant would have the theoretical capacity to respond to about 10,000 vaccines at once. He's saying vaccines are so safe, you could give an infant 10,000 vaccines and it would be okay. In fact, if you couldn't be further from the truth. If you start following sudden infant death syndrome, it almost always happens on the day that the baby goes in for the, I think, 2-month or 4-month or both, and they get the like 5 or 6 shots that day. And it's almost always after that kind of 5 or 6 vaccines in one day that these babies end up dying. And there's a lot of different mechanisms as how that can happen, but one of them is, again, that chronic glia activation in the brain, and that it's such an immunoexcitotoxicity that those microglia are activated to the point where they go on this destructive rampage and start attacking the brain, and they are highly concentrated in the brain stem, which controls your respiratory system. And if they destroy enough of that, the baby's just going to stop breathing and die. So anyway, he has the audacity to say that a baby could get 10,000 vaccines at once. I think it says 100,000 there, but in the actual text it's 10,000. What else does he say? Aluminum. It's very present during pregnancy. He says aluminum is considered to be an essential metal, which it's not. With quantities fluctuating naturally during normal cellular activity. It is found in all tissue and is also believed to play an important role in the development of a healthy fetus. Aluminum plays an important role in the healthy development of a fetus. And this is a doctor we're talking about? Aluminum plays no biological beneficial role, especially in the development of a fetus. But what does he say to justify that statement? He says, well, during a healthy pregnancy, the amount of aluminum in a woman's blood increases. This is true. We'll learn why. The blood of premature infants has more aluminum than that of a full-term infant. Yeah, it typically does. Is preterm a picture of health? No. The breast milk of a mom with premature infant contains more aluminum than that of a mom who carried their baby to term. Is that a biological necessity? I don't think so. Let's look at what's really happening. Why are there elevated levels of aluminum in the blood during pregnancy? Okay, that baby is basically stealing everything mom has, okay? So aluminum that we're all exposed to, whether it's in our diet because of baking powders and other aluminums that we eat, there's aluminum added to medications, very high levels, along with fluoride. There's aluminum in the water. There's aluminum in our deodorants. There's aluminum in the air, right? We're exposed to aluminum. That doesn't make it a good thing, okay? But we all have aluminum in our body, and it's stored, a lot of it, in our bones and in our organs. So what happens is aluminum that was previously stored in the mother's bone, along with other minerals the baby does need, is mobilized in order to deliver the essential minerals to the baby, creating elevated aluminum blood levels. Higher aluminum levels are found with preterm births, but that doesn't mean aluminum is beneficial, and most likely means it's causing harm and forcing preterm birth. So you can imagine if the mom has high levels of aluminum in the body and starts leaching these minerals, and along comes all these toxic levels of aluminum, and it's threatening the baby's life, that's going to trigger preterm labor. And that fetus is saying, okay, there's more harm than good being done here. We need to get out. And because of those high levels of aluminum, preterm birth happens. And he's trying to twist it, as usual, and say, oh, it's a sign of health and longevity, and it's a good thing for these babies. Absolutely not. So, if our perception is so greatly influenced by propaganda, and it is, nobody's immune to it, so are our emotions and our actions. This is a science. They've got this down to a science. They know how to manipulate us. You have to learn how to view it, discern it, recognize it, and study so that you can recognize it. Anyway, so our emotions and actions are affected by this. But what are our emotions? Emotions are just chemicals that are secreted by how our brain perceives the environment, right? So they're controlling that perception by parroting headlines over and over again. Infectious disease, death. Infectious disease, death. Infectious disease, death. Vaccines, safe, protection, life, wonderful. Okay, so, and that's about as far as anybody knows. When I get in debates with people and I say, let's talk details, they don't know any of the details. They just say, well, I just know it's safe because my doctor told me so. So, know the details to discern the truth. And more importantly, know thyself, okay? Learn the power you're born with. You have a power within. You are a smart, intelligent person. If you have questions, go study, go ask. Don't just ask one person, ask lots of people. Put yourself out there, get exposed to as much data as you can, and start discerning truth for yourself. And stand up for liberty and choice. Man, so what's the good news? Well, there is some. That groupthink mentality, you can get out of it. Not all the time. Again, we're all influenced in that groupthink mentality, and it's different than how you think individually. But, as it says here, each individual has a share in numerous group minds. Those of his race, of his class, of his creed, of his nationality, of his religion, you name it. You have a different groupthink for every group you're a part of. And you kind of go along with things that the group does. You get to learn how to kind of view things more objectively and start thinking for yourself. It says, and he can also raise himself above them to the extent of having a scrap of independence and originality. And that's from Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego by Sigmund Freud. But I'm going to say it again. Each individual has a share in numerous group minds, those of his race, of his class, of his creed, of his nationality. And he can also raise himself above them to the extent of having a scrap of independence and originality. So I encourage you to do just that. Go study. Think for yourself. Grab that scrap of independence and originality for yourself. Be independent. Through self-awareness and self-education, we can hone our discernment skills, control our perception, and improve our daily emotional outcomes. I know we can. I've done it. I don't live in fear. I don't fear the measles. I don't fear pertussis. I don't fear diphtheria. I don't fear those things because I've studied and studied and studied. Not just vaccines. I study nutrition. I study cannabis. I study mental health. I study as much as I can. I'm always studying. Every day I'm trying to come up with ways to improve myself, improve my son's daily outcomes. I read books. Okay, I've read Dissolving Illusions. I've read How to End the Autism Epidemic. I'm reading Excitotoxins by Russell Blaylock. I'm reading several of Russell Blaylock's books. I self-educate by sources that I trust. I follow Dr. Berg, Dr. Bergman, Dr. Humphreys, Dr. Deisher, Dr. Shaw. I follow, and I follow all kinds of science publications. I follow doctors on LinkedIn. I do everything I can to expose myself to as much information as I can. And what speaks to me as truth at the time is what I go with. And I focus on myself, I focus on my family, and you know what? We've improved greatly our health outcomes. We don't use any type of medications in our home. We don't use Tylenol, ibuprofen, Aleve. We don't use allergy medications. We don't use anything. We use food, okay? And we use organic food, and we manage our food intake. We manage our hormones. We manage ourselves, and we're doing amazing, okay? Unfortunately, we are stuck in the medical system because the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that doctors put holding on, his brain has become physically dependent on, and we're kind of stuck. But we're going to continue on our path of self-enlightenment and self-care, and we're going to see if we can heal his brain to the point where we can get him off that. That's the goal one day. Who knows if it'll ever happen. But we work on it. We work hard, and we study hard, and we do our best, and I want you to do your best, and I want you to be independent, and I want you to know that God made you in his image and likeness, and that it was perfect, and that it is perfect, okay? The immune system is perfect. Okay? We are divinely designed to thrive on this planet as we are. There is no need for this type of intervention. Okay? These diseases, these bacteria, these viruses, these microbes, we've been with them throughout all of time. Okay? And it's through man's own arrogance and science that we have given these microbes, bacteria, and viruses the ability to overtake us. We've weakened ourselves in many different regards through toxins, through chemicals that we've created on our own, through overcrowding, through lack of hygiene and sanitation and all these things. Again, study the history of disease and you will not be afraid. You will know that you are strong and you can survive and thrive on this planet naturally. Naturally thrive. That's what I'm here to teach you what to do. It works. It's amazing. And you will no longer be in fear. Anyway, till next time. Love you guys. Out.